media and horror movies go together like blood and guts, or Ari Aster and our deep existential misery. And through the decades, the trusty pause button has come to our aid in the quest to scope out all of the juicy background details, head-scratching puzzles, or Easter eggs horror directors have left around the screen for us. With that in mind then, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are the most paused horror moments. Carved Patio Boyfriend, Scream. 1996 saw Scream rise out of the schlocky slasher ashes of the 80s, steal all the tropes, and turn horror on its head. In Scream's opening sequence, we famously have Casey Becker answering a phone call from Ghostface, but it's soon revealed that Casey's high school sweetheart Steve is gagged and bound on the patio. To save his life, Casey has to correctly answer some horror-themed questions. Spoilers, this doesn't go well for Steve. We hear a squelch, we see blood, the boyfriend's head slumps to the side, and the camera only rests on his body for a brief moment. But what has Ghostface done? Multiple pauses show that might be a trail of guts there, but no matter how many times you freeze the frame, you still can't quite figure it out. Her own personal Jesus, Carrie. Adapted from the work of Stephen King, Brian De Palma's Carrie tells the story of a young social outcast for whom the combination of a strict mother, school bullies, and a sudden onset of telekinesis prove fatal. A true showstopper, the film's climax sees Carrie White literally bring the house down after crucifying her mother, in turn burying them both. As part of this, De Palma adds to the uncomfortableness by showing a solitary saint surviving in the rubble of the family home, with creepy lit up eyes that seem neither object nor human. First things first, it's not actually Jesus, though the pose and Bible at his feet make this an easy mistake, but instead it's Saint Sebastian, another Christian martyr. The fact his pose mirrors that one Carrie's mother was in when she died is no mistake, perhaps implying that Carrie's mother was the martyr who died to save us from Carrie White, or perhaps making a more complex comment on the role that her uptight religious moralizing played in destroying Carrie. In any case, fingers hit the pause button to compare Carrie's mother's earlier scene and to try and work out whose eyes they are and what they might mean. The Uninvited Guest, Insidious. The first Insidious movie contains not only the most pause-friendly moment in the franchise, but one of its most bone-chilling scares. Josh Lambert's mother Lorraine arrives at the new family home, telling of a spate of nightmares she's been having involving Josh and Renee's son, Dalton. Told around the dining table, Lorraine's recurring nightmare features a demon with a red face who has been stalking Dalton's bedroom. Cutting back and forth between Lorraine's face, Josh and Renee's reactions, and the creepy images of her dreams, we are primed for a scare in the frame of the story, but not one in the real present. Thus, we're totally unprepared when the big red Darth Maul looking guy Lorraine is talking about pokes his head out from behind Josh and projects the sounds of hell right at us. Yeah, no thanks. The End, The Blair Witch Project. To this day, fans continue to search for any remaining secrets in the game-changing Blair Witch Project, and nowhere more so than in the film's end sequence, which sees Heather follow Mike through an abandoned house, drawn in by the cries of their friend Josh. The scene concludes with various camera bumps, with a haunting final shot of Mike immobile, staring into the wall no less, Heather screaming, and Heather's camera knocked to the ground. At the time of its release, rumours swirled about what may or may not have been hidden in the shadows of this foreboding final scene. But even with today's technology and higher definition copies, the mystery still persists. Can we spot the witch or rusting par? Can we see what happened to Heather? Or is this all just a product of clever filmmaking and location choices? Witch on the Wardrobe, The Conjuring. The first Conjuring film takes place in the 70s, with paranormal investigators Lorraine and Ed Warren taking a case of the Perron household, a secluded farmhouse where a malevolent presence has awoken. This James Wan picture has several notable scares throughout its runtime, but none are as cleverly conceived as the scene which introduces the film's villain, the witch Bathsheba. In the dark of night, the Perron daughters hear a disturbance around their wardrobe, and while one goes to investigate, the other hangs back just the right distance to spy what's actually in store, giving an audience-baiting gasp that sets up the next shot. A quick pan up and zoom in on Bathsheba atop the wardrobe, but she's only there for a few frames, but yet it's still so terrifying. The shower scene, Psycho. Half psychological thriller, half gothic horror, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho famously departed from tradition by killing its main protagonist at the end of the first act. In one of the most famous scenes in cinema history, Marion Crane is caught mid-shower by knife-wielding, dressed as his mother motel owner, Norman Bates. The string shriek, the camera cuts back and forth between perspective shots of Norman plunging a knife, reaction shots of Marion's face, and body shots of the knife hitting home. But does the knife really go in? We see blood, we see the knife against Marion's skin, but even the swiftest of pauses may struggle to tell what really happens. Despite the fact Hitchcock himself said, to audiences and censors alike, this was all camera trickery. And that's still something that many are still trying to work out what exactly happened here. That head explosion. Scanners. David Cronenberg is a master at manipulating his audience and at delivering moments that will stay with you long after a film is finished. And in 1981's Scanners, the Canadian gave us a sequence that's one of the most memorable in horror history. As for Scanners itself, this sci-fi horror centers on psychics who have telekinetic and telepathic abilities, or Scanners as these people are known as. The dodgy Consec Weapons Company uses these gifted swords to carry out its bidding, but Consec finds itself butting heads with free-spirited rebel leader Daryl Revok, played by the brilliant Michael Ironside. In an iconic scene, Revok infiltrates at Consec marketing event and uses his abilities to explode someone's head. It's ooey, it's gooey, it was hugely shocking for its time, and it is a scene that many have paused over the years, just to take in the full SFX glory of this scene. Pazuzu appears, The Exorcist. An all-time classic, William Friedkin's The Exorcist, itself adapted from William Peter Blatty's novel of the same name, centers on poor young Regan McNeil as she becomes possessed by the demon Pazuzu. While this sinister evil makes its presence felt through Regan and the trauma she goes through during that movie, Pazuzu's visage is kept completely hidden. Until it's not. In a swift blink and you'll miss it shot, The Exorcist does offer one briefest of brief glimpse at Pazuzu's true face, and it is absolutely terrifying. Of course, this brief appearance is a moment that's been paused time and time again over the decades, with actress Eileen Dates playing the physical embodiment of this demon. The Mask Slips, Halloween. John Carpenter's Halloween is one of the most paused movies of all time, but not for blood or gore or hidden details. No, fans have been smashing that pause button over the years to capture a proper glimpse of the face of Michael Myers. In that 1978 picture, Haddonfield is stalked by a Michael who'd escaped from Smith's Grove Sanitarium, and who was now looking to reopen the trail of murder he began by killing his sister on Halloween night 15 years ago. Only this time, Michael's attention falls on Laurie Strode and her friends. Once a shape eventually corners Laurie during Halloween's climax, she manages to pull Michael's mask over his head, revealing his face for the first and only time in the film. The thing is, Michael Myers is his modified William Shatner mask, and while you don't want that mystique ruined, you can't help but pause for a glimpse at the evil that lies beneath that mask.
Tires in the Horde, Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is the kind of movie that rewards you for pausing and paying close attention on rewatches. Whether you're pausing the opening credits to identify characters you will later see under heavy zombie makeup, looking closely at televisions at the end to find out the fates of bit characters, or pausing on quick snaps of text to be rewarded with jokes you didn't even know were there, i.e. the place with all the fish, there is plenty waiting to be found. The moment in question here, however, concerns the zombie horde that's surrounding the Winchester pub our heroes are holed up in. If you investigate the zombies outside, not only will you be able to identify a few from earlier, but you'll also spot a familiar character if you're fans of star Simon Pegg and director Edgar Wright's previous work. See, that's because his zombified version of Mad Lad Raver Tires from the TV show Spaced is part of the crowd, still in his iconic yellow getup. I hope he's doing well. Luda's Zombie Baby, Dawn of the Dead, 2004. Aside from launching the careers of director Zack Snyder and writer James Gunn, 2004's Dawn of the Dead is widely hailed as both one of the best horror remakes of all time and one of the best zombie films of the last 20 years. Easily the most shocking and distressing reason for this, though, is the birth of Andre and Luda's undead baby. Andre as a character is an effective take on the cliched petty criminal just trying to do the best for his impending family. Likewise, Luda is a sympathetic mother-to-be whose choice to hide her bite from everyone except her husband is kind of understandable, if obviously misguided and doomed to get everyone killed. Eventually, when the infection starts to spread, Luda gets tied up, dies, and reanimates as a monster because what did anyone else expect? Devastated and conflicted, Andre subdues her before helping her deliver her child. Afterwards, Norma discovers them, shoots Luda, and then engages in a shootout with Andre, during which both are fatally wounded. It all culminates in chaos and the rest of the survivors discovering the carnage on display, as well as the grey, dead-eyed, and shrieking newborn zombie child, whom the resilient Anna Clark quickly murders out of necessity. Is it horrifying? Yes. Is it still a bit cute? Also yes. Did you have to pause to get a closer look? Absolutely yes. Feeling gutsy, City of the Living Dead. The first of two Lucio Fulci entries on this list, 1980's City of the Living Dead, marks the start of the Italian filmmaker's Gates of Hell trilogy, completed by both The Beyond and The House by the Cemetery the following year. Like Pia's Dario Argento and the Bava Boys, Mario and his son Lamberto, Fulci was known for depicting fantastically extreme carnage. Thus, viewers should have known what they were getting themselves in for here. Even so, it's difficult not to become nauseated while watching the movie's most disturbingly unsightly set piece. In it, teenage couple Rose and Tommy are kissing in Tommy's car, only for Rose to suddenly see flashes of villain Father Thomas staring at her menacingly. Right away, she starts crying blood, slowly regurgitates her organs, and then rips out Tommy's brain. Whereas most directors would linger on the debauchery for merely a few seconds, Fulci tortures Rose outright, as well as the audience, with roughly a dozen glimpses of her increasingly helpless, distressing, and repulsive downfall. While the practical effect is of course effective, it's actually the crying blood bit that always gets me. It just looks so uncomfortable. The Snyder Cut Army of the Dead. Considering his status as a major Hollywood director and the fact that this isn't even his first zombie movie, it was to be expected that Zack Snyder would slip a few Easter eggs into his latest blockbuster epic, Army of the Dead. The zombie heist film has plenty of frames you'll want to pause and interrogate, which, to Snyder's credit, even if you don't like the lad, you can still appreciate that he does deliver some striking images here and there. However, one cute one was actually revealed before the movie's release. During a visualization of the Las Vegas heist going off without a hitch, you get a brief shot of a vault being opened, and in the top left, you can actually see the canisters of Zack Snyder's Justice League cut sitting snugly on the shelf. The Red Queen's laser grid, Resident Evil. The Resident Evil film series is often chastised for its dwindling quality and persistent inauthenticity, especially when compared to its video game counterparts, but each of the 6 movies offer at least a few noteworthy parts, even if they are mostly noteworthy because they're just daft. Arguably the best of the bunch, though, is the famous laser corridor scene from Paul W.S. Anderson's 2002 original. After reluctantly teaming up, Milla Jovovich's hero Alice, Colin Salmon's commando leader James One Shade, and several other tough-as-nails soldiers infiltrate the Umbrella Corporation's hive facility and attempt to shut down the movie's villainous AI, the Red Queen. While en route, Shade and his team enter a high-tech passageway decorated by white lights and glass. Unsurprisingly, the Red Queen's defense system locks them in and sends several increasingly complex laser configurations at them. Before long, all but Shade have been sliced in incredibly creative ways. This is when we get the Red Queen's magnum opus though, a checkerboard laser screen that's too big and too fast for anyone to dodge. As a result, Pooper Colin Salmon is instantaneously cut into dozens of meaty squares, with an arresting shot of his lacerated face etching itself into viewers' memories before he collapses. Babyface, brain dead, aka dead alive. If there's one movie that challenges Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2 as the king of excessively gory and goofy zombie horror comedies, it's Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. The 1992 classic is about as over-the-top and rewatchable as possible, with at least a dozen delightfully silly and/or disgusting occurrences to pinpoint. Easily the top combination of the two, though, comes when Elizabeth Mullen's Rita gets her head ripped in half during the legendary party sequence. A meek and nerdy lass, she's perhaps the most innocent and kindly character in the film, despite not having too much screen time. That makes it all the more hilariously horrendous then when she's woken up by the zombie baby who'd already been wreaking havoc all over the place, who literally climbs up her throat, pushing his hands out of her ears, grabs her cheekbones, and then tears her face apart. Even worse, the kid then forces Rita's body to attack more people before being lit on fire and legging it. Although it's a quick moment, the sheer shock, wit, and monstrousness of it all leaves an indelible impression. Splinter to the eyeball, Zombie 2. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Italian cinema was ripe with unofficial and unconnected sequels to major Hollywood staples. While several of these have gained fame, or infamy I guess, over the years, such as 1975's Return of the Exorcist and 1980's Alien 2 on Earth, virtually no other contender equals the cult classic stature of Lucio Fulci's international breakthrough, Zombie 2. Titled as such to cash in on the success of Zombie, which was the European edit of Dawn of the Dead, it follows an ill-fated crew on a Caribbean island that succumbs to a voodoo curse. In typical Fulci fashion, many memorable scenes like the underwater zombie versus shark fight stick out, yet none rival the uncomfortable tragedy and torture of what befalls Paolo Menard. After telling her husband David that she wishes to leave, but to no avail since he wants to stay and do more research, she retreats to their beach house. That night, she hears a commotion outside, and before long, a zombie breaks in and attacks her, resulting in her truly gnarly demise as the zombie slowly pushes her head into a piece of splintered wood. Fulci's successive shots of it gradually entering her eye are tense, horrifying, and yet kind of abjectly fascinating. Rhodes gets ripped apart, Day of the Dead in 1985. There are few main characters in zombie movies more lovably despicable than Captain Henry Rhodes. Played to perfection by Joseph Pilato, he spends the majority of the film as a chauvinistic tyrant who prioritizes his militaristic agenda and over-the-top machismo over the knowledge, feelings, and logic of everyone around him. Thus, it's no surprise that Romero gives him one of the most satisfyingly explicit and deserved deaths in the genre. After imprisoning and, on occasion, murdering the other protagonists, Rhodes selfishly tries to leave them all for dead and save himself from the impending horde of undead walkers. Unfortunately for him, he's found by the movie's more sympathetic and intelligent zombie bub, who shoots him as an act of revenge. Screaming while scrambling away, Rhodes eventually reaches an exit, however he's met with a legion of bloodthirsty foes on the other side, all of whom proceed to rip him apart in gorgeously grotesque detail. It's one of the great Tom Savini's finest creations, and it absolutely must be suspended and studied to be truly savoured.
Stepping out of the shadows, The Strangers. Brian Bettino's The Strangers is a phenomenal horror that torments and terrorizes its audience just as much as it does the couple who find themselves in the crosshairs of Man in the Mask, Pin-Up Girl, and Dollface. Part-time slasher picture, part-time home invasion movie, the sheer randomness of the heinous events of The Strangers is a striking and stark warning of just how erratic and chilling the world can be at times. Like a cat playing with a trapped mouse, this 2008 offering is a harrowing viewing experience that makes you uncomfortable in your own skin. Part of the twisted charm of The Strangers, of course, is in how delicate its delivery of terror is, and there is no finer example of that than when we realise the Man in the Mask is ominously lurking inside the cabin where Liv Tyler's Kristen is. The use of lighting here is fantastic, with the Man in the Mask barely visible as Kristen is utterly unaware that her would-be attacker is there. Even more impactful, the use of one continuous wide shot as Kristen potters around the kitchen here only adds tenfold to the tension and unease of the viewer. It's also here that many reached for the pause button, with us all keen to try and get a good look at the creepy figure menacingly watching from the shadows. The evidence locker, Bride of Chucky. By the time of 1998's Bride of Chucky, the Child's Play franchise well and truly had its tongue firmly in its plastic cheek as it veered more towards the realms of comedy than out-and-out horror. Perfectly encapsulating this spirit is a moment that had Child's Play fans reaching for the pause button, with Bride of Chucky's opening act playfully acknowledging certain other horror properties. As Charles Lee Ray's former beau Tiffany, played by Jennifer Tilly, looks to breathe new life into Chucky, she manages to wrangle her way into the police evidence locker that houses the nefarious good guy doll. In a grin-inducing move, we find that Chucky isn't alone in this lockup. Without mentioning by name and not using exact replicas, Bride of Chucky then showcases the masks of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees of the Halloween and Friday the 13th franchises respectively, the knifed glove of A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger, Leatherface's chainsaw from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even some of the puppets from the Puppet Master series. It was brief, but it was brilliant, as Bride of Chucky had people pausing the film to see which other famous horror properties they could spot during all of this. Wes Craven's cameo, Scream. Wes Craven's Scream is one of the most influential, game-changing movies in the history of horror, full stop. Taking the overplayed, formulaic tropes of the slasher subgenre and poking fun at them, the meta approach of Scream both made fun at itself while likewise being absolutely terrifying. Forget A Nightmare on Elm Street, forget The Hills Have Eyes, it was Scream where Wes Craven was at his absolute finest. Not only was Scream utter genius, it also gave us a brilliant Blink and You'll Miss It cameo from Craven himself. As Henry Winkler's principal Himbry gets spooked by a knocking sound outside his office, we see Himbry briefly investigate the nearby empty school corridor. And it's here that we get one of the most enjoyable horror cameos imaginable. Not only do we get a disheveled Wes Craven as the school janitor, we also also see that he's wearing the same style sweater and hat of one of his other most famous creations, Freddy Krueger. For good measure, the character is likewise named Fred. To say that Craven and his brilliance are missed is an understatement of enormous proportions. Simply put, Wes Craven was absolutely one of a kind. The calls are coming from the house. Black Christmas. Jess, the caller is in the house. The calls are coming from the house. With that, the shocking revelation and that shocking impression at the centre of 1974's Black Christmas is exposed. After so many creepy phone calls and several dead bodies quietly amassed, this beloved picture rocks its audience to the core by revealing that the person who has been causing so much torment throughout Black Christmas is actually somewhere in the sorority house that houses the movie's protagonist. The moment that Olivia Hussey's Jess is informed of this by a panicked Sergeant Nash is horror gold, but it's the immediate aftermath of this blockbuster news that has first-time viewers reaching for the pause button. As Jess stands frozen to the spot, phone still in hand, the camera pans over to the dark, ominous staircase that we now know houses a deranged killer just around the corner. And so, hitting pause here, horror hounds found themselves scouring every inch of the picture in wincing curiosity as to whether the film's killer can be seen. Of course he cannot, and Jess ends up nervously heading up the stairs to find the dead bodies of two of her friends. The whole "the calls are coming from the house" angle would go on to become a staple of the horror genre, yet its origin point was here, in Black Christmas.
Supernatural, Days of Our Lives, Season 6, Episode 15, The French Mistake. Supernatural has always been full of Easter eggs and inside jokes, with the actors never afraid to poke a little fun at themselves. This was especially evident in the episode The French Mistake, where Balthazar sent Sam and Dean to an alternate universe to protect them from Balthazar's hitman. The meta-episode sees the brothers as stars of a TV show called Supernatural, and they appear as actors named Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki. Castiel is a Twitter-obsessed Misha Collins, and as in real life, Sam is married to Ruby. The story is incredibly entertaining to watch as we see Jared and Jensen act as Sam and Dean, pretending to be Jared and Jensen acting as Sam and Dean. Did you follow that? One of the most amusing moments in the episode, and worth pausing to appreciate fully, is when Dean finds out that Jensen appeared in the cheesy soap opera Days of Our Lives, as he did in real life. And Sam pulls up an embarrassing shot from the show when Jensen was looking decidedly less like the handsome, capable hunter we know so well. Stranger Things, the Demogorgon appears. Season 1, Episode 9, The Upside Down. The main antagonist of Stranger Things Season 1 was shrouded in mystery for most of the episodes. It was named the Demogorgon after Eleven said it looked a little bit like the Dungeons & Dragons character, but apart from that we had no idea, and it was still a real shock when we finally saw it. We were given little hints to its appearance, first when Eleven was in the sensory deprivation tank, and then when Nancy was exploring the realm inside the tree looking for Barb. Eleven only saw it from the back and was snapped back to reality when it turned around. It turned and roared at Nancy, but we only saw its face quickly before she ran, and it was like Game of Thrones Season 8 level dark. The final episode of the season had the children facing off against the police in the school, when Eleven accidentally summoned the beast by making all the officers bleed out of their eyeballs. Attracted by the blood, the Demogorgon burst through the wall and we got our first proper look at it in all its glory. Well worth a pause to take it all in. It seems odd now that you can buy it in Lego pop vinyl and even cuddly versions, but the Demogorgon reveal was really stunning at the time, and totally fearsome when it's not in its plush form. The Walking Dead, Heads on Spikes. This unforgettable episode showed Daryl, Michonne, Carol, and Yumiko released after being captured by Alpha and her Whisperers. Before they left, she gave them a speech about how they could leave peacefully alongside the Whisperers so long as they stayed out of her territory. She made sure to tell them she'd clearly marked the borderline of their territory for them. As they're walking home, they find a beaten and bloody Siddiq tied to a tree, who points to the border gruesomely marked by 10 spikes, each topped by the zombified head of a protagonist character. The camera paused and focused on each person in turn, but it still took some rewinding and pausing for fans to identify just who the victims were that found themselves headless and on spikes. The unhappy victims were Tara, Henry, Enid, Tammy Rose, Ozzy, Alec, DJ, Addie, Rodney, and Frankie. It was a tremendous shock to lose so many main characters at once. On the bright side, it actually kinda could have been worse, as in the comics, Ezekiel and Rosita also found themselves impaled on spikes, which would have brought the total head count to 12. The Haunting of Hill House, Nell's Ghost. Season 1, Episode 6, Two Storms. Now, there are enough hidden ghosts in The Haunting of Hill House to warrant an entire list on them, but this one was particularly poignant. In Episode 5, we learnt about Bent Neck Lady, a ghost that Nell had encountered several times during her life, terrifying her as a child. The big twist came at the end of the episode, where we found out that Nell herself was actually the Bent Neck Lady, and she appeared in this way because of how she looked when she hanged herself. She wasn't seeing a ghost at all, but a vision of her future self. In episode 6, we see Nell's body beautifully presented in a coffin by Shirley with the family gathered around. As well as seeing Mother Olivia in the background, one shot showed the whole family looking towards Nell's body, while if you paused, you could see Nell's ghost, sadly looking on in her bent neck pose, standing at the back of the room. Teen Wolf, Styles' Murder Board, Season 3 and 4 credits. Up to Season 3, Teen Wolf Scott's best friend Styles is shown moodily walking away from his Jeep in the credits. Everything changed once his dad, Sheriff Stilinski, found out about the supernatural events in Beacon Hills. Styles really came into his own and started investigating the creatures and murderers as a detective would. That included putting together a murder board. Season 4 saw Styles making up his board in the credits, and pausing this sequence hinted at a lot of the story to come. This season focused on the Deadpool and the Benefactor, leading on to the return of Kate Argent and her terrifying berserkers. There's a drawing of the Mute, the assassin who killed for the Benefactor, and an article about the Walcott family's murder, which he was responsible for. The newspaper articles also tell of the virus and quarantine in the high school, and there's a photo of a man in a shirt and tie, possibly the chemist, who created the werewolf-killing virus. Other articles reference other events like the battle in the mall in Season 3. Peter and Derek both have headshots on the board highlighting their importance to this season, and their different reasons for leaving at the end of it. There are also tons of other tidbits you can pick up, so if you're a fan, make sure you pause on this one. Charmed, Melinda Warren in Book of Shadows, Season 1, Episode 1, Pilot. In the original incarnation of Charmed that ran from 98 to 2006, the Halliwell sisters traveled back to the year 1670, where they helped a mortal woman called Charlotte Warren give birth to a little girl called Melinda. Melinda would go on to create the Book of Shadows and would become a powerful witch and the original ancestor of the Charmed ones. Melinda also appeared in the series, working with Piper, Prue, and Phoebe to defeat a warlock. When Charmed was rebooted in 2018, the new sisters were introduced as Mel and Maggie Vera, and their older half-sister, Macy Vaughn. The story was meant to be inspired by the original series, but the sisters were not meant to be related to the Halliwells in any way. However, when the sisters were looking through the Book of Shadows in the pilot episode, if you pause, you can clearly see one of the pages is about Melinda Warren. Fans went wild trying to investigate this link and see how it connected the reboot to the original. Unfortunately, press releases then revealed that it was just an Easter egg and not an actual sign that the two are connected. Disappointing, but well done for finding it if you did. American Horror Story, Twisty the Clown Chronicles, Season 7, Episode 1, Election Night. Poor Twisty the Clown, mentally disabled after being dropped on his head as a child, he eventually found success working as a clown in a traveling show. That is until two dwarves, jealous of his popularity, spread a vicious rumor that he was a child molester. With his career in tatters, Twisty attempted suicide, but only resulted in blowing off the bottom half of his face, leaving him hideously disfigured. He descended into kidnapping and murdering because, sure, and wore a scary grinning mouse mask to cover the hole in the bottom of his face. However, even this was revealed to have an innocent motivation, when ghost Edward Mordrake told us he was just trying to save the children from their abusive parents, shortly before killing him. It was quite sad then to see that Twisty had been immortalized as a terrifying villain in the horror comic Twisty the Clown Chronicles in the cult season of American Horror Story. Young Oz Mayfair Richards is given a copy by his clown-fearing mother. If you pause the exchange, you can see the cover features other Freak Show members, including Jimmy Darling, Meep, and Pepper. Hannibal, Beverly's Body, Season 2, Episode 5, Mukozuke. It's a good day whenever I get to talk about my favorite show on a What Culture list, and NBC's Hannibal has plenty of pause-worthy peril. Season 1 had a shish kebab nurse, a human cello, and a Colombian necktie. If you don't know what that is and you're about to sit down to a meal, maybe don't Google it. Season 2 had started strongly with the horrifyingly beautiful human mural, which needed to be seen from above to be fully appreciated. However, the first death of a character we were really affected by was poor Bev, the fiber analysis crime scene investigator who was a much loved and trusted member of the FBI team. Unfortunately, her intelligence and trust in Will Graham led her investigation to Hannibal Lecter's basement, assuming that he may be the Chesapeake Ripper. Hannibal discovered her and murdered her, freezing her body before cutting her into individual layers and displaying each of them in separate glass frames in the observatory. Our reaction to her fate was similar to distraught agent Jack Crawford, but the scene was definitely worth a pause to appreciate both the imagination and the effort that must have gone into creating such an exhibition. Bates Motel, Norma's Corpse, Season 5, Episode 1, Dark Paradise. We all knew what was going to happen to poor Norma Bates, but it was still interesting to see her portrayal in Bates Motel, particularly as within Psycho she was pretty much just a skeleton with a wig on it. Season 2 had ended with her death from carbon monoxide poisoning, which Norman had intended to use to let both he and his mother slip away together. However, Sheriff Romero unwittingly saved Norman, but failed to revive his beloved Norma. Season 5 began 2 years after this and showed Norman carrying on as if his mother was still alive in the house. After a particularly heated argument with her where she storms off, he ends up heading down to the basement, where we see him crouch down, struggling to decide what to do. As he lays his head on Norma's lap, the camera pans back and we see the shot that everything had been leading up to. Norma's perfectly dressed and preserved corpse sitting upright in a rocking chair, staring at us with glassy white eyes. It is definitely worth pausing to take in this gorgeously macabre side. Twin Peaks, Bob's Reflection, Season 1, Episode 1, Pilot. The first episode of Twin Peaks saw the townspeople trying to come to terms with the death of homecoming queen Laura Palmer, having washed up on the riverbank coated in plastic. As her death is investigated, we eventually learn that she'd been abused and finally murdered by her father, who'd been possessed by Bob, an interdimensional demon created from an atomic bomb blast in New Mexico. Bob is first seen properly in the second episode, where Laura's mother Sarah sees him crouching behind Laura's bed, staring menacingly back at her during a vision. However, this wasn't the first time he appeared, and his origin story led fans to return to the first episode with that pause button ready. The pilot episode ended with Sarah experiencing another disturbing vision. However, set dresser Frank Silva accidentally appeared in the shot reflected in the mirror behind her. David Lynch saw the scene and liked the look of Silva so much he decided to keep it in the show and cast him as Bob, changing the storyline from the original plan of Laura's killer just being her father.